software updates. In this nugget, we'll be talking about software updates, where we'll start off by taking a look at just the very basic Microsoft update. Well, it's very interesting, but it's not very useful for enterprise environments. For that, you're going to need to go to a more elaborate solution such as WSUS 3.0. WSUS is Windows Server Update Services. And with WSUS 3.0, we'll start off by taking a brief overview of what its feature set is. We'll also take a look at some information there about computer groups to leverage WSUS 3.0 in the best possible way and to use the least possible administrative effort. You'll want to create some computer groups. Now, keep in mind, these are not the same as security groups that you might put computers into. Also, with WSUS 3.0, there's a hierarchy to administer WSUS with, and you should be very familiar with that hierarchy, especially for exam purposes. In fact, both of these points, I would say, are very important for that purpose. And then I'll just take you through a couple of quick demos there with WSUS so that we can kind of see how it operates. We'll also take a look briefly at SCE, which is System Center Essentials, System Center Configuration Manager, which are more advanced versions of WSUS. And then there's the System Center Operations Manager, which keeps a good inventory and track of all of the systems within your network. Hey, have you noticed that some things just seem to get bigger and bigger all the time? I'll tell you one thing, I look at my waistline, it's getting bigger all the time. In fact, I don't think I'm ever going to fit into those skinny jeans anymore. I'll tell you another thing that gets bigger over time, and that's Microsoft operating systems. They have more bells and whistles on them, more complicated. They're supposed to be better, but as a result, their attack surface is also going to understandably grow. With millions of lines of code, there's bound to be something in there that somebody will figure out a way to exploit, and that's why we need to have Windows updates and security patches and service packs and feature packs and all that sort of thing. And as you add those things onto the Microsoft operating systems and Microsoft applications, of course, those applications in certain ways, hopefully in good ways, will actually get larger and larger. Another thing that gets larger is the amount of those updates. In fact, it's probably just about impossible for any one human to keep track of all those updates, to understand what they all are and so forth. And that's why we have a couple of different ways of keeping those things up to date. One of those would be Microsoft Update. And when it comes to Microsoft Update, we got to keep one thing in mind. This is not the same as Windows Update. We're only going to cover Microsoft Update for a brief moment here, but it's really designed for individual computer administration. So your home PC users or your really small business users who just accept the default update parameters for Microsoft Update, which means that it's going to download any updates as they become available, especially security and critical updates, and then it will install them for the user. So there's not a whole lot of administration on the user side of things, other than perhaps they'll have to manually restart the computer sometimes. This is also going to require separate approvals. I mean, if you decide to take more control over it, then you can specify that you want to control whether or not it downloads the updates, and if it does download the updates, whether or not they get installed. So you approve the approvals, decide upon the approvals, and you decide upon the download itself, whether it downloads all of them and then just waits for you to then install them, or it only downloads them once you've already made the approval. Also, there's no kind of reporting or centralization with all of this. If someone in my organization has chosen to use Microsoft Update, there's no way for me to know, aside from visiting that computer, that they have installed the latest service pack or update or security fix or whatever it is. So ideally, this is going to be better for small environments, possibly where they don't even have IT staff, but this is just where maybe everybody in the office has just kind of cobbled it together and figured out on their own how they want to update their operating system. Hopefully, most users are smart enough to know that they do need to accept most of the updates. Rarely do Microsoft updates or Windows updates or whatever you want to call it cause any kind of problems, especially with other Microsoft products. That could happen still, but that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time when you get some kind of a conflict, it's going to be with a non-standard or custom or very old application. Also, Microsoft Update does also include Office. Okay, and that's going to be important to understand as well, because a lot of security vulnerabilities in the past have come through Microsoft Office. For example, there's certain things that Microsoft Excel could do, especially if you use it with VB script and so forth. Well, there's ways of totally taking over the computer. So Microsoft Update includes Microsoft Office and certain other applications that Microsoft might also have. Windows Update, on the other hand, and that might be another term you've heard in the past, this does not include Office. Windows Update will only update the operating system itself. And this is something that I would definitely keep in mind for your exam objective purposes, because Microsoft may want you to be able to differentiate between these two. Alright, well, if you want to use more of an enterprise solution for distributing updates to your clients, you don't want to use just standard Microsoft Update. We need something that we can kind of centralize a little bit better, and that would be the case with Windows Server Update Services, or WSUS 3.0. If you want to make this work with Windows Server 2008, you must have at least Windows Server Update Services 3.0 Service Pack 1, and that's available for download right now. And in fact, it's really available for download at this very moment, because I forgot to download it before I started teaching here. So I'm downloading it right now. So anyway, we got that going on. And also, what this does is it not only gives you the kind of the normal updates that you would expect, but it also gives you drivers. Okay, so it gives you a little bit of extra stuff there. It gives you feature packs, service packs. It updates Office, Exchange. You have several different other products available from Microsoft that you can now centrally administer from WSUS. And it's pretty scalable too, because one WSUS server can service up to 25,000 clients per server. Now, you're probably not going to do that. You're probably going to have a more of a scaled or a hierarchical arrangement there. But conceivably, one server could service that many clients. And also, this is not really just for, like desktop clients. You can update your entire environment with this. Your SQL servers, your Exchange servers, your domain controllers, any other servers or any other kind of Windows machine that you have, you can use WSUS for. Now let's take a look here at WSUS computer groups. One of the things that makes your life easier with WSUS is you can categorize various types of computers into different groups. This differs from putting them all in an organizational unit. Now, very likely they'll all be in the same OU, but they don't have to be. This also differs from a security group, where all the computers are a member of a specific security group. Again, they may all be the member of a same security group, but that's not the same as a WSUS computer group. The only purpose for a WSUS computer group is so that we can approve or deny updates, for example, for that specific group. Now, that one group of computers in WSUS might include SQL servers, Exchange servers, domain controllers, whatever. They're probably somewhat similar in some respect. And all those different computers might not belong to the same security groups. They might not all be in the same OU, but they can all be in the same WSUS computer groups. Now, when you first start up a computer and it contacts the WSUS server, it'll be initially unassigned unless you've assigned it some other way. And if it's going to be unassigned if it doesn't belong to some other WSUS group. You can assign groups through what we call server-side targeting or through client-side targeting, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, also, there's the All Computers computer group. Now, this one will include all computer groups that you have defined. Okay, you might have 5 of them, you might have 100 of them, but all your computer groups plus anything that is in the unassigned. And that would be, all computers. All means all. Then for your targeting, and this is where we specify which kind of a group your computer goes into, whether unassigned or a specific computer group, then you can determine that a couple of different ways. You could determine that on the server side. With this, you go into the WSUS console and you configure this manually. Now, this sounds like it's more of an enterprise solution because we're doing it on the server side. But in reality, this is not really that practical because you have to do it manually. It's much better if you can do it by group policy object, and this is what we call a client side. And this, once again, the reason why we do this, the reason why we call it that is because you are on the server and you configure it on the server. This one, when you configure a group policy object, that actually exists on the server. But then the onus falls to the client to put itself into the proper WSUS computer group. And once it reads its policy, it can go ahead and do that. But this is more likely to be the more enterprise, method for doing this. And that way, any computers that are in a specific OU, for example, I link a group policy object to that OU, and then I give specific instructions that those computers should belong to, the laptops, WSUS computer group or whatever I've defined. And then there's also group policy object update settings. And we're going to be taking a look at those here after a little bit, but there are several different things that you should be aware of in terms of when the clients get their updates, whether or not they are forcibly rebooted when their updates are applied, whether or not they're woken up from a suspend state. I guess we call it standby now. I still call it suspend sometimes, or sleep, but you get the idea. So there's several different settings there that we can take a look at as well. Now we'll be taking a look at some of the things that I'll be discussing here in the interface, but for the time being, let's just continue on here. We have WSUS hierarchy administration to think about as well. What very often you'll have is one WSUS server per site, and this of course makes sense. We'll look at this in a diagram here in a little while, but you wouldn't want 1,000 computers in a branch office downloading the latest 500 megabyte service pack from the WSUS server in a hub over a 256K WAN link. That would just almost be impossible, really, in practical sense. Probably would never happen. So what you might want to do instead is to download that to a WSUS server in the hub office, and then have a WSUS server down in a branch office get that same update, but also maybe from Microsoft. Maybe they have a faster internet connection than they do a WAN link. So then they can get that update. They download it one time in that entire site. It goes to the WSUS server, and then all of my clients pull the update from the WSUS server. Easy as can be. Now, we will normally have an upstream server. The upstream server, if you think about this in a hierarchical sense, is probably going to be at the top. This is where you'll do all your initial approvals, determining which updates you like. Normally, we like to approve security updates whenever possible, but you may also need to test these out. And that's also the usefulness of the WSUS computer groups that we talked about in the previous slide. Because maybe I've got one WSUS computer group just called test, and I've got a representative sampling of computers in this WSUS computer group. Maybe they're from different departments or something like that, or maybe it's just a lab, which would be smart if you can do it. This can also be virtualized machines, of course, and they will probably have a representative sampling as well of the various types of applications you run in your organization, especially custom ones, which are more likely to have problems with any of the Microsoft updates. So then you'll approve your new updates for only this test, WSUS test computer group, and then if everything goes fine and nothing's blue screening you or crashing or something like that, then you can go ahead and approve it for either all computers or for whatever other computer groups you want. So that's where we do our approvals, normally on the upstream server. And then we also update our content, or get our actual updates onto the upstream server. Now, the upstream server, once it's approved an update, it doesn't mean that it necessarily has to download it as well. We could decide that we want to leave the updates on Microsoft's update servers and then have our clients individually download them over the internet to each individual computer. That's one feasible option. And when would you want to do something like that? Well, that might be the case if you have a fleet of salespeople that have a lot of laptops. They VPN to the server every day to check email or whatever else it is that they need to do. And when they do that, they get a list of updates that have been approved for that computer. But you don't want to send the update, the security updates and all that, over their connection to their computer. You want them to be able to download themselves over their own internet connection. So that's just an example. And then we also have downstream servers. With downstream servers, we have two different ways of going. One way we could go is something called replica mode. And with this one, we just inherit all of the things that the parent had. Anything the parent approved of, now you're forced to approve of. Any of the updates that it downloads, you're also going to download. All of those things there are going to be exactly mirrored on a replica. And this is a very important thing to understand for exam purposes, the difference between replica mode and autonomous mode. But again, replica mode, it really is pretty much just a mirror of the upstream server. Computer groups, all the configuration, everything is just exactly the same on replica. Now then there's autonomous mode, and with this one, you approve your own updates locally. This might be the case in a branch office, where I have an IT staff there that's fully capable of determining what updates would be suitable for their location. So they will approve them locally, but I could still, if I want to, still receive the updates. Oops, how did I do that? jumped around over here. I could still receive the updates from the upstream server if I want to. Now, you don't have to. You can also get those from the internet, the Microsoft's update servers on the internet. But you do have some more flexibility, at least, with autonomous mode. And we'll take a look at that here shortly. All right, to conceptualize all of this, I put together this diagram here. And by the way, aren't you glad that I didn't just decide to draw all of this out on a whiteboard? Wow, what a mess that would have been. So thank goodness for Visio. All right, so what we've got going on here is we have a hub office, and we have here a WSUS upstream server. This is where we've made all of our approvals. We've decided that we want to, let's say, download the updates from Microsoft Update over our internet connection here. So we're getting our updates, we've created our computer groups, we've made our approvals. All of those things have been configured on this upstream server. And then what we could have here is we may have a branch office down here. Let's take a look at how this one works. This one would be a WSUS server in this branch site. And again, it's a good idea to put this WSUS server in each site so that you have local access and less WAN bandwidth. And then this one would be a downstream server, but it would be in replica mode. What does that mean? Well, I receive everything from the WSUS upstream server. It's pretty much a mirror of this one. So I get my approvals. You can see the arrow like this. I get my approvals from the WSUS upstream server. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you also, in a certain kind of way, get your updates from the WSUS upstream server. It's not that you actually get the files that consist of the updates. You can configure it that way if you want to, but it might not always be best. What that does mean is that the only updates that will be available to you are the ones that the WSUS upstream server has already approved of. There may be other updates out there that didn't apply or something like that. I could not make the decision as an administrator down here to just go out and get it myself because I'm locked into whatever was decided up here. Now, notice that also you do have some flexibility with this. You can decide where you get the updates in terms of the actual update files. I could get them from this WSUS upstream server, but look at my WAN connection. Wow, 128K DSL link, and it's 85% utilized. No way in the world do I want to download service packs and all of that kind of stuff from my WSUS upstream server over that slow WAN link. So instead what I can do is I can use our cable modem at 10 megabits per second. That's what I've got in my house from Microsoft. It seems to only give me half of that for some reason. Maybe Microsoft's stingy. But anything else that I have, I'm just using residential cable modem. Actually, I kind of a business upgrade on mine. And I can get 10 megabits per second for $60 a month. Wow. That's huge. So that would make much more sense for these folks to get their actual updates from Microsoft, but their approvals from their parent upstream server. Now, on the other hand, I have another branch office over here, and we have a totally different WAN connection over here, and a totally different internet connection. With this one, we have a very fast connection to the hub office. Maybe we've got a lot of business going on here, and we had to really, shell out some bucks, and we got an OC3 connection, which gives us a smacking 155 megabits per second. And that's 55% utilized connection there. So that's extremely fast. That's just about LAN speed to the branch office. So with that kind of speed and with that kind of utilization, I can afford to get all of my updates from this WSUS upstream server, especially when I compare it to my internet connection, which is only 1.54 megabits per second. So it makes more sense in this case to get my updates from the WSUS upstream server. It's going to be a lot more timely and faster getting them from my hub office up there. Now, how about my updates, though? Well, notice what I'm in. I'm in autonomous mode. Oops, I didn't mean to scratch that out, but I'm in autonomous mode here, which means that administrators down here decide what updates they want. And then they'll just go ahead and pull down whatever updates they want from the upstream server. Alright, now I've gone ahead and downloaded WSUS, and by the way, before you install WSUS, you must also have IIS installed, otherwise it'll tell you that you should have installed it. But we've got IIS installed, and I've already finished the wizard for installing WSUS. It's actually installed now, but at the end of the installation process, you have to answer some configuration wizard questions. So I'm just going to briefly go through this, and these are things that you can change your mind about later on in the console if you want to, but I'll just go ahead and answer all of these now. For example, I can join the Microsoft Update Improvement Program, which will just send information to Microsoft about my experience here. I can also synchronize from Microsoft Update, and this is where we were talking about things such as downloading from other WSUS servers or from upstream servers. In this case, if I am the upstream server, then there's nowhere else for me to go except for Microsoft to get my updates. But if I'm a downstream server, I might want to put in another server over here. So for example, I actually do have another WSUS server that's in production on this network, so I could put in that name here if I wanted to. And I could use SSL when synchronizing updates. Remember, you do have to have certificates on both machines, and they have to be from the same trusted source. So that is, of course, always important with SSL. And then I can also specify that this is a replica of the upstream server, and if I choose that option, that's what I was saying earlier when we said we could use replica servers. This means that it's going to mirror update approvals, settings, computers, groups from its parent. So really don't have too much configuration here. The only thing you could do is if you chose this option and later on you realized, oops, that's too limiting, I'm not able to choose my own updates or something, you can go back into the console and deselect that and then just choose whatever you want to. I'm going to choose synchronize from Microsoft Update here. But if I did choose this other option, this doesn't mean that I would necessarily lock myself into the approvals of that other server. It's just that I'm going to get my update files from that other server. Like I said, once again, since if I'm going to choose to install the upstream server, which is what this would be, I'd have to get them from Microsoft. If you have a proxy server, enter in all of the credentials and everything that you'll need there. I don't have one that I'm using in that sense right here, right now, so I can go ahead and leave that empty. Now what's going on here is that I clicked on Start Connecting. This does take a little while. It connects with Microsoft's update servers, and then it will identify the types of updates, the products, and the languages that can be downloaded. This takes a while, so I'll pause recording and resume when it's finished. And now it's gotten all of the information it needs for this, so I'll go ahead and click on Next. And this is what it was trying to obtain for me on the previous page when I made that connection. I needed to identify which kinds of servers, like Exchange servers, Expression, all of these different things that it would have updates for that I could support in my environment. So, for example, I don't really have a BizTalk server, but if I have Exchange, certainly I can choose that one, or I can choose the specific edition of Exchange that I want to be able to support, and then I'd get all the updates for that. By the way, Microsoft hasn't made a whole lot of Expression, but just as a quick FYI, Expression Media is kind of like Microsoft's answer to Photoshop, as well as for other kinds of media prep products. So it's kind of Microsoft's idea there. Forefront, which is kind of their new gateway management system, and a lot of different things that you see here. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to pretty much deselect everything except for maybe a couple of items here and there, just so that we can be as clean as possible just for demonstration purposes. And in particular, I'm going to go down to Windows here, and I don't really need any of these. I'm using a Windows 7 client elsewhere in my network, but it connects to a different WSUS server, so that's not really relevant. So I'll just stick with Windows Server 2008 and Windows Vista. One thing I would recommend is that if you are using Windows Vista Ultimate, that you avoid these language packs unless you really need them, because that downloads a huge amount of of data. So just be aware of that one and don't use those unless you really need them. And then of course you've got 64-bit editions of XP or normal XP as well, and you can even update Microsoft Works. Wow, is anyone still using that? Okay, anyway, I'm missing a couple here, so we'll just go ahead and select those, and I think that's pretty much it. I'm just going to stick with the bare essentials for the time being, and of course, if you want to add more into this at any time in the future, certainly you can do that. Now, you can also choose any kind of classification that you want. I usually leave off the drivers because it could download hundreds of different drivers. Of course, you can also configure WSUS so that it will only identify clients that need a particular driver, but it's a lot to wade through, and so I usually avoid that, but it just depends on your situation. The rest of these are relatively important, so I'm going to go ahead and leave those on and click on Next, and then you identify when you want to synchronize. Now, you can do this manually. I choose mine to synchronize automatically at a certain given time of downtime, and the number of synchronizations per day as well. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that by default, or Microsoft's typical behavior, is to release updates only on Tuesdays. So unless it's a fast-moving threat that they're trying to address, they might write a fix for it and release it on the same day that it's been finished, which could be any day of the week. Otherwise, they usually store them up till Tuesday, just FYI. So then as I click on Next here, we can say we want to launch Windows Server Update Services Admin Console immediately and begin the initial synchronization. That also takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and click on Next, and then we'll go ahead and finish that out. And before we do, notice that it identifies that it recommends using SSL. We need to create some computer groups. We need to assign computers to groups using group policy. Again, that's the client-side settings, client-side targeting that we would use there is another way of expressing that. And then we could configure the auto-approval rules, which would be things like any security update I want to just automatically be approved. I don't want to have to go through it as an administrator and pick and choose each one. I just want to automatically do that. So I'll just go ahead and finish here, and when it's all done, we'll come right back and take a look. Alright, so now that the updates have taken place, let's go ahead and take a look at some more information. Let's go to this server. If I click on the server object here, it tells me I've got 346 security updates waiting to be approved. Great Scott, I better approve them before I get hacked or something. And then, of course, there's critical updates. Of course, the difference here is that critical updates generally tend to be more towards the stability of the system or some kind of compatibility issue or something like that. Also, there are no computers registered to receive updates. That means I haven't really gone to my computer grouping yet. I haven't done anything to configure that. If I go into my updates, you can see that there's a number of different ways of looking at updates. I can just choose all updates, unapproved, failed, or needed. Nothing appears right now, but once we change our criteria, you might start to see more. For example, here it says failed or needed. Well, I haven't had any clients check in with this server yet, so it doesn't know if anything needs it or if it's failed to install properly. So this will get populated as I start to populate my computers here. And then, of course, you have a number of other categories if you want to prioritize these. Maybe you always want to go to critical and security updates first. WSUS updates is the client piece that works with WSUS and allows the client to properly download the approvals and the updates. Then we have the computers here, all computers, and then unassigned computers. Right now we only have one group, and that is the unassigned computers. And again, I don't think we'll have anything that appears here. In fact, we don't, because nothing's contacted this server yet. And as an example, if I wanted to create a group here for my Vista machines, I would right-click here, choose Add Computer Group, Nugget Lab, Vista, or something like that. And I could also do Nugget Lab Exchange, Nugget Lab SQL, Nugget Lab Domain Controllers, whatever else it is that makes sense to me. And then my downstream servers, I don't really have any, and so we don't really have a whole lot to look at there. But then there's also our synchronizations. Notice that we can look here and see if we were successful in our last sync and see if we got any updates from them. Now, the key thing here is also, well, there's reports. We don't really have anything to report because we've never updated anything yet, but as you start to do updates and so forth, that could start to be useful. For example, it can show you a report of any computers that failed to receive a critical update, and it's very easy to read and works really well. Now, the options thing is where I want to spend a little bit more time here. All those options that we saw in the wizard as we got started here can be changed through all of these items down here. For example, if we want to change the source, update source, we can, instead of synchronizing from Microsoft Update, synchronize from some other WSUS server instead. That might be the case if we have better connectivity to some other server or something like that. You can also use SSL. Again, you have to have certificates from a common location to be able to use that. Then we also have products and classifications, which is this stuff we saw here, where we can pick and choose which products that we want. Update files and languages. I do recommend that, especially if you're storing the update files locally, that you only choose the languages that you actually need, because otherwise that can start to take up a lot of space. In many enterprise situations, we're not going to be using this last option like I'm doing in my case, where the computer is installed for Microsoft Update. What this means then, as a refresher there, is that my clients, like my Vista clients, for example, would see that, oh, I need these 5 updates, but instead of downloading them from the WSUS server, I'm going to download them from Microsoft Update out on the internet. And that works okay in really small offices, but as soon as you get a dozen, 2 dozen, a few hundred clients all trying to download simultaneously from Microsoft Update, that's a lot of redundant connections that are really unnecessary. So if that were the case and it was a little bit of a larger location, I'd store the files locally, and then you have some options here. You can download the update files only when the updates are approved, and that's a very good option because when I use this option, I'm not downloading files that I will never use. Now, when would you want to clear something like that? I mean, that seems to make a lot of sense. You would want to clear that perhaps if you were configuring an upstream server and you had downstream servers that you wanted to allow the administrators to run in autonomous mode. So they determine what updates they want to download. Well, you see, if I leave this checked, and then I approve of only, let's say, 200 updates, but a downstream administrator decides that they want 220 updates, well, where are they going to get the updates? Because I never downloaded them here. I only downloaded the 200 that I wanted. So, if that's the case, and you're going to have downstream administrators that might want additional updates besides what you approve of, then you might want to clear that. Now, that means you're going to download everything, but, it'll make it more convenient for the downstream administrators. Let's also look at, by the way, before we move on, I would be aware of all these settings here for exam purposes, just FYI. Then the other one here would be download express installation files, which is a little bit possibly a misnomer because there's nothing express about them. What this says is that the WSUS server will download the full package of the update. You see, what's going on right now a lot of times is when you get an update, it's really just kind of a starter piece, and it just gets you started, and then it makes a connection to the WSUS server and downloads additional files, or it makes a connection to Microsoft Update, and then it downloads additional files. So the starter piece is maybe only a few hundred K in size, but the actual update could be 100 megabytes in size. Well, with this, if I choose to download express installation files, this means that the WSUS server itself will download the whole package, everything about it. And then when my clients make a connection to the WSUS server, the whole package has already been downloaded, and they don't have to just launch a starter piece. Okay, they get the whole thing. So that's what that's all about, and it kind of explains that there as well. Now here we also see, and it's not available for us right now, but it says download files from Microsoft Update, do not download from upstream server. Now this is the upstream server, so that's why that's not available. If I were configuring a downstream server, then I would have the option here of one or the other. Now one reason why I might want to choose one or the other is, again, I might download files from Microsoft Update and check that box if the administrator at the upstream server had selected that. Because remember, that would mean then that some updates might not be available to me that I actually want to approve of. Okay, so that might be the case, and then I would choose that option on a downstream server. This also says, do not store update files locally. Computers install from Microsoft Update. You got to be really careful about that one, because that's only going to really work in the smallest of environments that still have pretty good internet connectivity. Because what'll happen here is if I select this last radio button, then we don't download any updates, and each one of my clients, once it receives an approval from the WSUS server, it'll say, oh, I'm supposed to install Service Pack 1, then each one of them will go out to Microsoft's website and download a 500 megabyte service pack. So this does not scale out very well unless you have just a handful of clients. Also in this dialog box, for the update languages, you could download updates in all languages. If you're storing the files locally, I would strongly recommend that you do not do this, because this adds up to a huge amount of updates. So, for example, I'm only going to select the languages that I have some familiarity with. Okay, I took Greek and Hebrew in college, so I know a little bit about those. And I think I speak English. Some of you would question that. But otherwise, there's not really much purpose in me downloading Thai or Serbian or Korean or any of these other ones, okay? Because I don't know what in the world's going on with those. So if I were actually storing the files locally, then I would be very selective about which languages I was downloading. And of course, you would actually select the languages of your users instead. Now, in my particular case, I'm not storing the files locally anyway, so this is not really too relevant in that particular regard. I would also take a look here at automatic approvals. We looked at the synchronization schedule already, but the automatic approvals here is where you can set up a default automatic approval rule. And by default, it says when an update is critical or a security update, just approve it automatically without having to go in here and manually choose it. Okay, and we can approve that update for all computers, which remember means any groups that we've already created on our own, as well as anything that gets lumped into unassigned computers. If you want to change that at all, you just click on the link here for this item right here, and then I can say, oh, you know what? We also want to approve feature packs and service packs, whatever else that we want to apply. You can also choose approve the update for all computers, or you can choose a specific group if you want as well. Other things I can do here as well is to choose an edit, and then I can say when an update is in a specific product. So I might say for whichever product, maybe I'm mostly concerned about my Exchange server. And so that's the only one I really want to just automatically be approved. Actually, I probably wouldn't for an Exchange server, but you get the idea for whatever it is that might be of the most importance to me. And then this advanced button is actually pretty useful. What this one says is WSUS updates. This is, in other words, automatically approve updates to WSUS itself. Okay, and that kind of explains itself. But the one I want to get to right here is these revisions. Automatically approve new revisions of updates that are already approved. One of the frustrations you'll run into is that you'll look through some updates and you'll say, oh man, that one's 6 months old, and then you look at it and it'll give you a message right at the top of it that says that this is a superseded update. That means that there's some other update out there that has updated this. Now, it's difficult to go through hundreds of updates and pick and choose which ones have been updated and which ones haven't, and then hopefully approving the proper update that actually does update that previous update. You see how confusing all of this gets? Well, what we can do here is to automatically approve of new versions or revisions of those updates, and automatically decline updates when a new revision causes them to expire. These two checkboxes right down here at the bottom will save you a lot of time compared to what we might have used to have done in the past, where it's a lot more of a painstaking process than it is now. And then for our computer items here, this is where we're going to specify whether we're using client-side target or server-side targeting. This first option is server-side targeting, where new computers that come on the network and communicate with the WSUS server will automatically be placed in unassigned computers. From there, I can then move them into any other groups that I've created, and that would be the server side. Here, I would use the group policy or registry settings on computers. I don't really see much purpose for registry settings, especially in an Active Directory environment. The group policy is going to be a much better option, going to save you a lot more administrative overhead and time just to use a group policy. And that's what I normally do, so I'll just go ahead and leave that one as you see it there. And then I'll show you how you configure that in a group policy here in a little while. Other things that are pretty cool here are the server cleanup wizard. With this one, it's going to do things such as delete old computers. For example, maybe in Nugget Lab Vista, I had a Vista machine that there was a laptop that got stolen 6 months ago. Well, it hasn't reported for 30 days or more, so using the server cleanup wizard, it can remove any accounts that haven't shown up in 60 days or so. Now, these are not removing Active Directory accounts. It's just removing that account from out of the Nugget Lab Vista computer group here. And again, it bears repeating, none of this stuff here is actual security group or actual accounts that we normally have in Active Directory. These are just kind of discrete groups that are created to make WSUS easier to manage. Another thing I like here as well, by the way, is these email notifications. With this one, you can send email notifications when there are new updates are synchronized, or send status reports. These are pretty cool. And then you just send in your email server information over here. And I kind of like to get a daily update on what's going on with that stuff. Microsoft Update Program, we've already looked at that one. You can also personalize how the data appears. This is just a matter of preference. And then the WSUS Server Configuration Wizard, which is the same wizard that we ran a little while ago. You can rerun that here if you just want a really intuitive way to go through all of that. But anyway, that gives you kind of the rundown on WSUS. Alright, now let's go ahead and take a look here at Vista Client 01, where I've made a remote desktop connection. This computer is a member of the domain, but let's go ahead and take a look at what its update settings are. If I go to Windows Update, I've actually disabled it for this particular computer for various reasons, for testing reasons and for lab purposes. However, I might want to check for updates here because it tells me that I probably ought to. But if I can also click here, Change Settings, this is where I want to get. This is identifying whether or not I install updates automatically. I had chosen chosen never check for updates. But it gives me some rudimentary information, and you can see here the kind of stuff that it's given us. And you can see that as a local administrator here, I can change any of these settings to pretty much whatever I want to. And then remember, it's visually identified as requiring administrative permissions because of the little shield icon on the OK button here. But I'm going to leave it this way for the time being. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I can use group policy objects to forcibly apply updates to this computer in the way that I decide that I want to from the WSUS server. So, over here in Active Directory Users and Computers, we see the Vista Client 01 computer. That's not really where I want it to be because just in the computers container, I can't really link a group policy object to it like I could in OU. I could to the domain, but that's too broad. So what I'll do is I'll just drag that into Building 1 desktops here. And then I get a little message there saying that group policy objects could change because of dragging and dropping this account into that. Well, that's exactly my objective, so that's not really much of a warning in my case. And what I want to do here now is to go and create a group policy object on that location for Building 1 desktops. Now we talked about group policy objects in a previous point, so I'm going to make this quick. I'm just going to say WSUS settings. Okay? Now, what we can do with this is, if I'm pretty broad with this and I want most of my organization to have the same exact settings, I could link that to the domain, a group policy object to the domain with these settings. But if I want to be more granular and say different OUs have different requirements with this, I might do something like what you're seeing me do right now. Also, by the way, I would have to reboot the Vista Client 01 computer in order for it to be able to properly receive and apply its group policy objects as well as the updates that I want it to receive. Okay, so let's go up here to our computer configuration policies, and of course we're editing computer configuration settings because we're working with an OU that contains a computer object. Then we'll go to the administrative templates, Windows components, and then finally we'll go down here to Windows Update to be able to make some of these changes. Now here, a lot of these pretty well explain themselves, and it's not my objective to identify every little radio button and checkbox and things like that, but I do want to point out some of the ones that are more relevant to our exam purposes. So let's take a look at some of the key items here. One of these is the automatic updates detection frequency. In other words, how often do you check for updates? Now this actually has a staggered time, so it's not going to be exactly 22, which is the default here, but it's a plus or minus a certain period of time. But you can specify, generally at least, how often you want it to be able to check, every 6 hours, every 20 hours, whatever. Then you can also specify to configure automatic updates, and this is going to be pretty important right here because none of the updates are actually going to happen properly unless you enable this. And then you specify what you want to happen. You can auto-download and notify for install, or auto-download and schedule the install. And I'll tell you now, in most corporations for generic user desktops, it's going to be this one right here. So we'll choose that option in this particular case. Schedule the install every day or on a specific day of the week. Now, for example, if you don't have too much urgency with this, you can make it every Sunday if that's not a work day for your organization. And then if the computers have been suspended, you can also set up another setting that will wake up those computers, apply the update, and then once that's been done, they'll go back into suspend. So Sunday actually might be a good day for that particular item, but I'll use mine for every day. And then you specify, a scheduled install time. This is 3 a.m. Notice we're on 24-hour clock here. So it's 3 a.m., which is normally a downtime for most businesses, but you can specify whatever makes the most sense for you there. So anyway, now I've got those items set up. You can also delay a restart for scheduled installations. If there's an update that requires a restart, you can enable this and you can say wait a certain number of minutes before restarting that computer. That might give the user some time to save their files and stuff. But what I really prefer there for an enterprise solution is to set this option, no auto restart for scheduled automatic update installations. And when you enable this, it's not going to automatically, shut down the user's computer and restart it right in the middle of whatever it was that they were working on. Maybe they had some important files open that didn't get a chance to get saved or something like that. That's highly disruptive. So I normally enable this setting to disable the automatic restart. However, the user will get a notification that they should restart the computer. And I think this is kind of funny because in my own corporation, my wife's laptop is a member of our domain, and I have this setting turned on, and all she ever tells me is, I can't stand these messages that always tell me I have to restart my computer. I try to tell her how important that is so that she can get the proper security updates, but she's not all that technical, and so it doesn't seem to go anywhere with her. But so maybe you'd want to just forcibly restart them in that case. I don't know. And then the key item that you really must figure out here and configure is the specify intranet Microsoft Update Service location. When I enable this, what I'm really telling it is where my WSUS server is. So I'm going to enter in here something like HTTP : // and then what's my server? DC Nugget 1. Okay, and then in this particular case, that's also my where my database is, and my, if I can type here, DC Nugget 1. So it's the same in both locations item for that particular item. So then I'll click OK there, and that's mostly what I have to configure in order to get at least a basic start with this. I did forget one setting. The enable client-side targeting. Remember that one. So I want to enable that, and I want this computer, any computers in the OU to which this group policy object is linked, to go to what I call a Nugget Lab Vista. Okay, hopefully I remembered that properly. But that's the target name for this computer, so hopefully it'll dump it right into that particular computer group when this computer restarts. Now back over here on the server, I need to actually give an update or two for this client to be able to receive. So here I've gone to critical updates, and I've changed the status to any, and then I hit refresh. You do have to hit refresh anytime you change these items. Now I'm going to go ahead and allow that to be installed. Maybe the Vista updates, Nugget Lab Vista, maybe they're my test group, my guinea pigs or something. So I want to go ahead and approve this, and I can do that by right-clicking here. And then I can specify only to Nugget Lab Vista. Now, what I would also often do, let me cancel that for the time being and come back into it. What I would often do here is if it's a update that I'm confident of, I'll just choose Approved for Install. Notice that I can also remove them. Approved for Install, and then it will automatically pass inheritance down to unassigned and any other groups that I have down here. If you choose multiple updates, actually let me do that. Let me show you how that works. If I chose whatever these items are, and I choose right-click and approve, then notice that if I choose approve for install here, it does not automatically pass inheritance down here. It only does that with a single one. So if I want to force inheritance to these other groups, I can press Control-C, which would force it to inherit, or I can just click the item here and choose apply to children. Oh, there's another one there too, deadline. What that is I can make sure that there's no hesitation in applying this. So I can make sure, say I want it all done in 1 week or whatever, and then it will urgently apply that update within whatever time I specify. So I'm going to go ahead and approve this update. Okay, just so I have something to work with here, and then I'll click on close, and that'll pretty much be it. Now what I want to do is to have this client receive that update. Also let me show you this. Under computers and all computers under my group here, I've got Nugget Lab Vista. Notice that this now pops up under here. By the way, you might not see it unless if you leave it at the default, which is failed or needed. This computer has not yet reported its status, so I might have to wait 22 hours actually for it to be able to report its status, and then it'll see that it needs a specific update, and then it would be able to receive that update that I just approved. Alright, then I gave this a little time to percolate, actually quite a while. I was getting tired last night, so I actually went to bed and got up this morning and took another look at this. Gave it a little bit of time to refresh and everything here, and what it did was it checked itself, this client checked itself against the update server, and then it identified there were some updates up there that really would apply to this computer. In other words, they're needed. So what I could do here is to take a second look at those updates, and if I go up here to all updates, you can see that I've already refreshed the view here to show me unapproved updates that are needed. You can also do failed or needed, but I haven't installed anything, so there's therefore nothing that's ever failed. And then what I would normally do is, these are probably all pretty important updates, I just Control-A to select them all, right-click and choose Approve, using the method that I showed you earlier. Also notice here that it says this update supersedes another update. This means that there's further on down the list here somewhere going to be an update that will also say this update is superseded by another update. And when that's the case, you can wind up with quite a few old updates, especially if you've been downloading them, so you actually have the files on the WSUS server somewhere. And if you want to clean those up, go down here to Options and choose the Server Cleanup Wizard. And there's quite a few different options here that are useful for that, but the one in particular is these superseded updates. So we can decline updates that have not been approved for 30 days or more, or are not currently needed by any clients, and are superseded by an approved update. And then you can see that it cleans up some other things that are pretty self-explanatory here as well, such as expired updates that, why would you need an expired update? So all of those things are pretty cool in terms of cleaning up and keeping, kind of lean and mean your WSUS server. All right, then finally, and just real quick here, let's talk about a couple of other alternatives besides WSUS. One of those alternatives would be the System Center Essentials, or SCE as we usually call it, and that would be System Center Essentials 2007, by the way. What this is useful for is it's going to do the same things as WSUS, but it's good for about 30 servers and 500 clients. And it's built on the WSUS 3.0 infrastructure. So it does have all the features of WSUS, plus it will also add the ability to update non-Microsoft products, and you can use .exe files, whereas something like WSUS will only update .msi. And actually the updates themselves are actually .msu files, but these kind of updates could update any other kind of software that you might have. And then you can also do scheduling with SCE, so you got a little bit more flexibility with that, rather than just waiting for the group policy object to tell clients, what time of the night to install their update. So you can stagger, updates and so forth across an enterprise. It's a lot easier that way. Also, it does compliance checking to make sure that everything's in line there, and it does inventory of both hardware and software, so that's pretty cool. It also has an auto agent deployment. The client pieces, all the clients that receive updates from SCE are going to need to be able to contact it and interoperate with it. It depends upon an agent for that to happen. The first time, however, that it contacts SCE, it will automatically download the agent, so you don't have to come up with anything elaborate to get it on there. Also, you do have to have System Center Essentials Service Pack 1 in order to make that work on Windows Server 2008. Otherwise, you'll have to install it on Windows Server 2003. Taking things a step further, you can go with the System Center Configuration Manager, or SCCM. And what this does is it offers you everything that SCE offers, plus it's designed for a larger environment, and you can make it hierarchical, whereas SCE is pretty much just a flat hierarchy. In other words, there is no hierarchy. With SCCM, you can also exceed the 30 server and 500 client limit that is inherent with SCE. So in short, you just use SCCM for larger, more elaborate infrastructure. There's also another product here to take a look at, and that would be the System Center Operations Manager. This is also known as SCOM. Some people say SCOM. But anyway, with SCOM, what this will do is it basically collects information. In order for it to do that, there needs to be a SCOM agent on the client. But once that agent is there, it will collect just about all of the key component information that you'll need to know about everything out there. It collects the events from all your servers and clients. It identifies what services are running and what state the services are in. It also identifies any applications which can be useful for inventorying items, inventorying your apps. And it also maps out your network devices so you can get a good picture of what's going on with your network infrastructure. In this nugget, we took a look at software updates. We started off by taking a look at the very basic Microsoft update, but of course Windows Update, and especially Windows Server Update Services 3.0, which is now in Service Pack 1, is a much better solution. And with this, we took a look at the quick overview of all of the features that it offers to you, and we also took a look at the importance of computer groups, which will help to significantly reduce your administration effort. We also took a look at the hierarchy administration that's important in a WSUS infrastructure, because you need to be very careful to know about where your updates are coming from, where your approvals are coming from, and that's a very important item for the exam purposes. And then we took a look at just a few demos on working with WSUS. Then we concluded with some information about SCE, or System Center Essentials, which is kind of an upgrade to WSUS, if you will, and SCCM, which is even more powerful than SCE. Both of these products will do things such as scheduling and work with a larger base of clients, and do things such as also allow you to update using executable files and to update things that are not Microsoft products. And then we also took a look at System Center Operations Manager, which is a great way to keep a pulse on what's going on throughout your organization, because it identifies things like applications that are installed, services that are running, events that you can track, all kinds of things of this nature. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.